It was 1893. A resort in Maryland told Charles Douglas that they didn't serve his kind. They thought by denying him a meal, they were putting him in his place. But he didn't argue. He didn't march. He walked down the beach, found the property line, and bought 40 acres right next door. He didn't ask for a seat at the table. He bought the ground the table was sitting on. This is the story of how Charles Douglas turned a restaurant rejection into the first black municipality in the state of Maryland. This is One Mike Black History, and if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemikehistory.com. But without further ado, let's get started. To understand this heist, you have to understand the insult. It was August of 1893. The Chesapeake Bay was the playground for Washington and Baltimore's elite. The system at the time called the place Bay Ridge. It was known as the Queen of Chesapeake. It was a grand hotel, massive boardwalk, and a restaurant that promised the finest dining on the East Coast. Charles Douglas and his wife Laura, they weren't there to make trouble. They were blackocracy. Charles was a high-ranking official at the Treasury Department. He was polished, he was wealthy, and he was a veteran. He walked to the restaurant at Bay Ridge and asked for a table. The waiter did not look at Charles's uniform. He didn't look at his credentials. He just looked at his skin color and said, "We don't serve your kind here." Now, this is the moment where the struggle would usually kick in. The textbook version of this story would tell you how sad Charles was. It would talk about the pain of segregation. But Charles Douglas didn't have time for that. He had a military mind. And he looked around the restaurant and saw white families eating. He saw the owners counting money. And he realized that their business was built on a territorial monopoly. They thought that they owned the prestige of the water. They thought by banning him, they were keeping the luxury for themselves. Charles walked out of that restaurant, but he did not leave the area. He walked down the beach, he crossed the property line, and he stood on the dirt right next to the people that insulted him. He was looking at a 40-acre tract known as Bashir's Farm. It was rugged, overgrown patch of coastline. To the owners of Bay Ridge, it was a waste of space. To the system, it was unimproved land. But to the Colonel, it was the high ground. Charles Douglas knew something the owners of Bay Ridge didn't. The system is only as strong as its borders. Bay Ridge was a fortress of whiteness, but the walls ended at the property line. If Charles could control the land right next to them, he didn't need their permission to exist. He could create a parallel world that Jim Crow laws of public accommodations could not touch. See, in 1893, separate but equal wasn't even legal doctrine yet. That would not happen for another 3 years with Plessy versus Ferguson. But the private property doctrine was already ironclad. The law of the land said that a man could do whatever he wanted with the dirt that he owned. Charles realized that public space was a trap. If you relied on the public to treat you fairly, you were a beggar. But if you owned the private, you were sovereign. So he went to the owner of the 40-acre farm, a man by the name of Daniel Bashirs. He didn't ask for a favor. He brought money. He offered him $5,000 cash. In 1893, that was an astronomical sum. It was roughly the equivalent of about $175,000 in today's money. But the strategic value was worth millions. Bashirs took the money. He signed the deed. And on that day, the Queen of Chesapeake lost its monopoly. Charles Douglas didn't just buy a farm. He bought the gateway to the bay. He went to the restaurant owners who refused him a sandwich, and he didn't say a word. He just started building. And the first thing Charles did wasn't build a resort for the masses. He built a fortress for his legacy. He built a home for his father, Frederick Douglass. He called it the Twin Oaks. But he didn't just build it anywhere. He positioned the home with military precision. Frederick Douglass had been enslaved on the eastern shore of Maryland. He looked across these same waters as a boy, dreaming of a world where he wasn't property. So Charles Douglas designed Twin Oaks so his father could sit on that property and look directly across the Chesapeake at the very shore where he was once owned. This was psychological warfare. It was a message to the system that if you didn't lose a slave, you lost the entire coastline. Frederick Douglass never got to spend a full summer there because he died in 1895. But the receipt was still filled. The Douglass name was now etched into the land in the deeds of Maryland. But Charles was not done. He knew that one house was an anomaly, but an entire empire is a network. So he began subdividing the land, and he didn't sell it to just anyone. He targeted the sovereign class. He sold lots to black doctors, black lawyers, black engineers, black poets in D.C. and Baltimore. He created a neighborhood where the white-only signs of Bay Ridge were relevant. By the turn of the century, Highland Beach wasn't just a place to swim. It was a black think tank. Paul Robeson was there. Langston Hughes was there. W.E.B. Du Bois was there. They weren't protesting segregation. They ignored it. They built their own hotels. They built their own pier. They built a community center. They built a closed economy where black money stayed in black pockets and black dignity was the default setting. Now, there's no way the system sat back and watched this happen. The owners of the white resorts nearby were furious. They saw the private property loophole working against them, and they realized that they had lost control of their territory. So they tried to use paper weapons. First, they tried to use vagrancy laws. They sent the police to harass people walking between the train station and Highland Beach. They wanted to make the journey so uncomfortable that the residents would give up. That didn't work. Highland Beach residents started their own shuttle service. They controlled the logistics. Then the white resort owners tried to use a legal glitch. They realized that Highland Beach was technically a part of an unincorporated area. They thought they could use local zoning boards to condemn the land or pass an ordinance that would tax the Douglas family into bankruptcy. They tried to treat Highland Beach like a nuisance. But the residents of Highland Beach were some of the smartest people in the state. They knew that in America, the ultimate hack for land was municipal status. In 1922, they executed their final move of the heist. They petitioned the state of Maryland to become an unincorporated town. They didn't want to be a neighborhood. They wanted to be government. And they won. Highland Beach became the first black municipality in the history of Maryland. Think about the payoff here. Because they were a town, they had their own mayor, they had their own police department, they had their own zoning board. When the white resort owners tried to pass laws against them, the people of Highland Beach just passed their own laws to cancel them out. They weren't marching and asking for civil rights. They were exercising their statutory power. By the 40s and 50s, Highland Beach was the summer Apollo. While white Maryland was obsessed with keeping its beaches segregated, Highland Beach was outproducing them culture and social capital. But the winds, they are changing, and the system shifted its strategy. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act passed and the public accommodations were integrated. On paper, this was a victory. But in a world of real estate and sovereignty, it was a Trojan horse. The system realized it could not keep black people out of the water anymore, so it decided to make the land too expensive to keep. This is the new Jim Crow. As white developers realized that coastal property was the ultimate asset, they began using tax assessment and eminent domain and environmental regulations to squeeze black families off their land. In places like Hilton Head and Bruce's Beach in California, the system succeeded. They stole land back using the laws that were supposed to protect landowners. But look at Highland Beach today. Still there. It survived the rise of developers. It survives the collapse of other resorts. It survives because Charles Douglas didn't build a charity. He built a closed-loop system. The residents of Highland Beach understood that the land wasn't just for lounging. It was for continuity. They passed these down for generations. They created trust. They created a black culture of holding the line. During the Civil Rights Movement, we get caught up about the seat of the lunch counter. But Charles Douglas reminds us that the lunch counter is just a piece of furniture, and that if someone owns the building, they can always find a reason to move the chair or keep you out. The true power is owning the blueprints. Charles Douglas was told his money wasn't good enough for a meal, and he didn't waste a second trying to change that with his mind. He used that energy to change the map. He proved that when the system closes the door, you can't keep knocking till your fists are bloody. You can buy the hallway. You can buy the entire building. You can buy the entire beach. You can buy the ground that it sits on. And today, Highland Beach stands as a reminder that we aren't just laborers in the American story. We are the engineers of our own exit. Thank you. This is One My Black History. I'm your host, Country Boy. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemyhistory.com. Hope you enjoyed this. This is something different. I enjoyed this a lot. Trying to do, once again, more stories about agency, about pattern interrupts, people overcome, and how they took a system that was designed to keep you back and beat it and overcame or outsmarted that system. Hope you enjoyed that. I'd like to thank all my day ones. You guys are amazing. Thank you guys all for coming out. Financial contributors. Oh, yes. And if you don't see your name here, please reach out to me. I'll add your name. I'm sorry. I love you all. Peace.